film. My name is Jim Ryan. I'm the Associate Director of the Kevorkian Center. And I'm here to welcome you all to our spring conference on Iraq since 2003, Beyond Conflict and Turmoil. Or is it Turmoil and Conflict? I'm sorry. In any case, I just want to thank a couple entities real quickly. The Kevorkian Center is putting this on, but we're putting it on with a lot of help from the Department of Middle East and Islamic Studies, Department of History, and the Department of Anthropology. And most importantly, from the help of two of our amazing graduate students, Afnan Al-Yafai and Dena Al-Adeeb. I promised them I would kind of keep this short and feature them because I think it's really important that they get a role in this. This whole conference is their brainchild. They came to us last semester with this idea for a conference on Iraq since, to commemorate the 16th anniversary of the invasion and to rethink the ways we talk about Iraq in this period, Iraqi history, the Iraqi present, Iraqi culture, Iraqi society. And thanks to their hard work, their organization, their ideas, we're all here today and tomorrow. So I just, before I introduce Afnan, who's going to introduce our speakers, I just want to say a huge thank you to them, and also to encourage you to come back tomorrow. We have a panel at 1:30 featuring a number of scholars on Iraq talking about a different theme of Iraq since 2003. And then tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock, we have a keynote address from Dr. Omar Mohammed, otherwise known as Mosul I. So we're all very, very excited for that. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Afnan Al-Yafai, second year in our master's program here, to introduce our speakers. Thank you, guys.
Okay, I'm going to try to project because I'm not a very good public speaker. So I'm Afnan, Dena. Thank you, Jim, for the introduction. So I'm just going to introduce everyone in the order that they're sitting. Ella Shohat is a professor of cultural studies at MEIS and art politics at NYU. Her most recent book on the Arab, Jew, Palestine, and other displacements was published in 2017 by Pluto Press and won the Middle East Monitor's Palestine Book Award for the year. Her writings have been translated into various languages, including Arabic, Hebrew, Turkish, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, Italian, German, and Japanese. Sundus Abdul Hadi is an Iraqi Canadian multimedia artist. Her work critically engages current crises in the Middle East through subversive and sensitive reflection, using manipulated photographic imagery, mixed media painting, artist books, and sound. Her most recent work is a self-authored illustrated book titled Shams about trauma, transformation, and healing. Her work has been exhibited in Palestine, UAE, Canada, America, France, UK, and Saudi Arabia. She has given workshops in Australia, Iraq, and Kuwait, and has been a speaker at Niqab, the Nobel Peace Prize Forum, Telfair Museum, and multiple universities in Canada and the US. Abdul Hadi has two-time recipient of the Consul des Arts. I cannot say that. CALQ. And a lot of awards and is very accomplished. And then Dena Al-Adeeb is an artist, scholar, activist born in Baghdad, Iraq. Dena is currently Chancellor's postdoctoral fellow in the American Studies Department of UC Davis. Dena received her PhD in Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies, Culture and Representation track from NYU, here. Dena is currently working on a book manuscript tentatively titled The Architecture of War, the U.S. Invasion of Iraq and its Cultural Engineering Project. Her work has been exhibited internationally at such places as Mana Contemporary, Lightwork Gallery, Museum of Tunisia, OFF, Biennale.
You don't have to.
And all of that. All right. Also accomplished. And Iraq-born artist Wafaa Bilal is an arts professor at NYU Tish's School of the Arts, is known internationally for provoking dialogue about international politics and internal dynamics through high-profile, technologically driven projects that employ the use of robotics, the internet, and photographic mobile mapping. Bilal's work is constantly informed by experience of fleeing his homeland and existing simultaneously in two worlds, his home in the comfort zone of the U.S. and his consciousness of the conflict zone in Iraq. Using his own body as a medium, Bilal continues to challenge our comfort zone with projects like Ardi? Third eye? Oh, okay, I'm reading that wrong. And Counting, and Domestic Tension. He lives and works in New York City. Thank you, and enjoy.
So first we will have Wafaa do his presentation, second Sundus Abdul Hadi, and then Dena Al-Adeeb, and then we'll open it up for discussion with all of you.
I wanted to start by thanking all the organizers, Ella, Sundus, Dena. Really pleasure to be here with you in conversation today at the anniversary of the invasion of our country. I'm going to share a project from 2003 until the present time. It is worth noting these projects made in the comfort zone of United States, responding to the life event that took place in the conflict zone of Iraq. These projects are not record of a war, an invasion, but rather they intend to evoke and engage complicit audience of the comfort zone. In 2004, I received the terrible news of the death of my brother Haji in our hometown of Kufa. He was killed by drone attack, an American drone attack. To be honest, for many years, for about 3 years, I did not know what to do with the news. I didn't even accept it as a loss. But then, in January of 2007, I was watching the news when an American soldier had an interview on TV, sitting in Colorado from the comfort zone, sending missiles through the drones on Iraq. I was shocked how the soldier is so disconnected from the ground emotionally and physically. Is it working?
It's working.
It's
Okay.
I'm trying to sound it.
Okay.
Because it's stuck.
Let's see if this is good. And as a result, I immediately had the idea of building a project that connect people and illustrate how the American soldiers are so disconnected from the war in Iraq. I immediately moved my living space to the gallery in Chicago, built a website that connected to a robot that shoots paintball. And for 30 days, I stood a target for people all over the world to shoot me. The result were 80 million hits on the website, 128 countries participate, and I was shot at about 70,000 times in 1 month. But the most important thing come out of that project is the dialogue that sparked. While the project is running, I was running a chat room that people could talk to each other, inform of each other in their comfort zone about the war in Iraq. Allowed the visitor to come and aid me through that month, and this is the result of 70,000 people. But another result was how the project ended on a high note. And I think by the end of the project, I once again believe in the power of art and in the power of the individual to spark a dialogue, not to impose their own ideas. And here is a quick video from that last day of the project. Sorry? It doesn't show? I don't know how to do. Can you come close here? There you go. It's a video. I may have to skip the video and continue with my presentation. In 2010, I was invited by Elizabeth Foundation of the Art to examine the invisibility of the civilian death, and I asked my question: how is it possible I could build a monument or an artwork for 100,000 people? Once again, I decided to do a performance to bring people to this platform, to engage them, and to illustrate the loss we experience. I studied a map of Iraq and built an algorithm to allocate where every Iraqi has died, about 100,000 of them. In one day, I tattooed the Iraqi cities and Iraqi borderless map on my bag in permanent ink, and within 24 hours, I allowed a tattoo artist to allocate in an invisible ink one dot for each death. And at the same time, I let people come and read the names of the Iraqis, and I thought it's a poetic gesture just to say the names, and even saying the name, we acknowledge their losses. I'll try video one more time to see if there's good luck. If not, we'll continue. Yeah, Microsoft doesn't like me today, so.
Should get an Apple sponsorship.
It's okay. I'm gonna shift to another project. It started from 2003 to 2014. This project, while I was doing these physically and mentally tasking performances, the Ashes series was a meditative artwork, tend to connect me physically and emotionally to the ground in Iraq. I start collecting images of destroyed places, images, public images, private images. Simultaneously, I will build physical maquettes, physical models of these images in the studio, and later on I would release them to the public after imbuing them with human ashes. And one intent of these images is to slow down the way we look at war images. Now, a couple of projects I wanted to talk to you quickly about how an artist shifts the practice from a conflict to the post-conflict. I've recently been in Iraq about 5 times, and I was sharing with Sundus and Dena about how optimistic I am as an Iraqi that Iraq coming back to have life again. And with the shift of the conflict on the ground, I noticed my practice was shifting from a conflict to the post-conflict artwork. In 2015 at Art Base, I was asked to do a project, and I decided to do a project about the post-traumatic stress disorder. And it came this very poetic space I built with a leaning wall threatening anybody who come close to it. Through my research, I came across Ibn al-Haytham, an Iraqi scientist who lived in Iraq and came with one of the first theories I know of how to heal people with color. So I allowed the people who, like me, who suffer from the post-traumatic stress disorder to come to the space and imbue themselves with the color of their choice. It was poetic, but also it was tends to go beyond the wall, because I decided to have a soldier standing there, an American soldier which I become friend with, and who also suffer from the same thing as I am, post-traumatic stress disorder. "168 project, it started 9 years ago from in Canada as a result of invitation to do a project about Iraq, and specifically the loss of libraries in Iraq. For 6 years, I contemplated what to do. In fact, at the end of 2016, I submitted the final drawing for the project as an interactive a video installations that take space of the entire museum. But in the last minute, I decided to shift the project, and I called the curator and I said, I have a new idea, and if you listen to me, if you accept it, we'll move forward. If not, we'll go back to the original idea. I said the idea title is 168 hours and 1 minute. The title come from an anecdote. As kids in Iraq, we were told during the Mongolian invasion of Iraq, the Tigris Dijla River ran blue for 7 days after the Mongolian decide to build a bridge using all the books in Baghdad, including Dar al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom, in order to cross to the other side. And that's where the title from. If you convert 7 days to hour, it's 168 hours, and I added the 1 minute to reverse the destruction. I printed 1,000 book, empty book, other, nothing in it, and but the title, and then I asked the public to engage with this platform, to exchange, take the white book and return a book from a list that is the College of Fine Art have provided me to restore the library they lost during the invasion of 2003. And I must say, I'm very happy we have delivered many books to this point. And I remember when we delivered the first shipment, the college informed me there is no place to put them. And I immediately started another Kickstarter campaign when I raised the fund and sent the fund to a class in Iraq in order to rebuild the reading room. And I was very happy to see all the students and the faculty taking part of rebuilding part of what being lost. How are we doing on time?
You're fine.
Good.
You have
Okay. I'm gonna see if the video I have is gonna work. If not, I will hand the podium to Sundus. This is, I will talk about it. It's a few years ago, I started thinking exactly when Trump took over. We were thinking about how could we bring together here people in New York, people from our own community, to have a dialogue of what is happening, to be with each other. And the result was a show called America. America, as many of you know, it means it is the way we say America in our language. And I'm happy to say it has been many of these shows, and it features a lot of Middle Eastern and other disfranchised people.
So my parents are Christian. They're Christian Arab, and so in our home for breakfast we were fed Jewish conspiracy theories. And then for lunch we had like a really healthy dose of Islamophobic horror stories. Like, do you guys remember, all of you, most of you are young, but do you remember in the 80s you had this drug commercial that this is your brain on drugs? Like, we were told, this is your life on Islam. And this is why they give us white names. Like, that's, a lot of people ask me if my real name is Fatima or Khadija, but it's not, it's really Susie. It's a message for the Muslim boys to stay away. And the worst part is sometimes they can't pronounce these names. Like, my favorite name that they picture is Victoria. My aunt's name is Victoria. There is no V in Arabic, there's only an F. So good luck keeping Muslim boys away when you call your daughter Factoria. So it worked with Factoria though. She married a Christian guy. So basically, to summarize, when a Christian Arab girl falls in love with a Muslim, she is either disowned, or her mother gets a heart attack, or somebody kills her in an honor killing. So you guys can imagine how scared I was when I fell in love with a Pakistani. It wasn't easy, and I'm actually writing a book about my experience, and it's titled, I Married a Muslim and No One Died.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker is Sundus Abdul Hadi.
Cindy, you want to take the podium, or?
You know what? I will take the podium, and I'm gonna use both screens. So
Okay.
I'm gonna have the HD.
Oh, actually.
No, that's fine. Because- So can we hit play at exactly the same time so that I can sync the TV with the projector? We're gonna do it, okay?
You might want to turn the sound off on one of them.
I'm gonna turn the sound off on the TV so that it's
Okay.
playing in-house.
Perfect.
So I'm gonna press play in 3, 2, 1. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for coming today. Thank you, Jenna, Afneen, Jim, for organizing this. It's really an honor for me to share the stage with, share the panel with Wafaa, with Dena, and with Ella, and everybody who came through. It's amazing. And this is not my city, so it's good to be welcomed. So I thought I would start by setting an intention. I wanted to set the intention because we're talking a lot about war and talking a lot about trauma. My intention is not to re-traumatize anybody because we all carry our burdens, and I don't want to re-traumatize myself either. So I'm kind of trying to create a bit of space that we can hold together. So on that note, I want to kind of rewind to 2003. Well, even before. Around 2002, first year university, Concordia in Montreal. I walk into my art history 200 level class, and the teacher starts by introducing the class by reading this wonderful document endorsed by Lynn Cheney of Dick Cheney fame, and basically saying that universities in America and North America should not be teaching Islamic civilization, art, and history. And I was like, well, here, she's gonna just throw that on the ground and be like, well, not in this class. And unfortunately, she said, and that is why I will only be teaching you Western, North American, and European art history. So, am I projecting, or do you guys need a microphone in the back? Okay. I'll give it. Okay. Yeah. So, that was the academic environment. That was the academic environment that I was going into as a young student while the war was raging. 2003, the war in Iraq started, and I wasn't born in Iraq. I was born in the UAE, but I felt extremely connected to my identity as an Iraqi. It was something beyond me. It was a spiritual connection, and I got really obsessed with looking at how my country was being represented in the media. Being in North America and seeing all of these images coming through, I was just taking it all in. And I wasn't able to make sense of it until I started really just laying it down in images and using these existing images and reimagining them in a different way. So this was the image that you saw before, and these the following few are from the Orchestra Series. And the Orchestra Series was really born out of a obsession with collecting media images and finding a way to subvert them and to recreate and reimagine my country the way that I would like it to be represented in the media, the way I didn't see my people being represented in the media and in my, in the world that we share, in our collective world. Whereas in my home life, I had such a beautiful, rich experience where my cousins were hip-hop producers mixing, Abdul Halim Halfol and Feiruz into hip-hop beats, and my husband was doing, Iraqi rap, and my mother was an artist, and my sister is an artist. It was just a very rich cultural experience where I felt connected to what it meant to really be Iraqi. And it's a privilege. I feel very privileged to have that experience, and I don't take it lightly at all. So orchestra evolved, and I worked on it for many years. Started collecting images really in 2003, and I wrapped the project in 2010. And it was a very difficult and draining farewell. Working on heavy images and heavy subject matter, and Wafaa, I'm sure you know, it can be a very difficult experience, especially when you come from a place and from experiences that are linked to trauma and various experiences of displacement. So it was a shift for me. I went to Baghdad in 2010, and I had a very difficult experience. What was known as Black Wednesday happened in the 6 days that I was there. 300 people died. There were five simultaneous explosions that happened in neighboring neighborhoods in the city. And I came back just depleted. I was drained, I was gone, and I had to find a way to rebuild myself. And I had been working for so many years on the darkness and trying to find a way to turn that darkness into something that I could articulate positively. And I still felt like I was coming up short, even with orchestra, with weapons being replaced by musical instruments. It was a difficult time. So I started really thinking about how I could transform trauma into something more positive. I was going to talk about this, but I'm going to skip it and This is a story all on its own. It's a painting called Inanna in Damascus. And if you guys are at any point want to talk about it in the question-answer period, I'd be happy to talk about it. But I put it up there because it's one painting that really represents how an artwork can embody a nation. This painting was misrepresented in the media when I put it out there. It was picked up by Arab media and completely misrepresented and misjudged as slanderous to Iraqis and Arabs. I got a lot of hate, like hundreds and hundreds of hateful comments. And then it was selected by a very reputable institution in Europe that's supposed to represent the Arab world, and it was censored from the exhibition and removed and then sent to Dubai, where I ended up almost getting deported for it. So we could talk about that later. What I really want to talk about is stories and trauma and how they can heal and how they can heal our collective wounds. I put up this quote: when an entire society is desecrated, demonized, invaded, or imprisoned, it reshapes the cultural gene pool of that entire generation. What is trauma then, but a collective and cumulative phenomenon? So this is where I'm at now. I'm really at this place where I'm trying to think about how not only can I heal myself on a spiritual level, but how we can all kind of take part in a collective healing and think about it. Because like you said, we're almost at post-conflict, but we're not. We're still dealing with our demons. We're still dealing with all of this heaviness, this pain. So I wrote this story called Shams, and it's my latest work. It's a short story that I wrote and illustrated, and I created a multimedia reading, a multimedia storytelling of it that I hope to share with you guys. It's got sound. The sound is the soundscape is produced by my cousin Sandhill, and it's about a little girl made of glass, and her name is Shams. So you guys are down for a little bit of storytelling? Yeah? Okay, just a second. So when I was a little girl, all stories started with the words "Kan ya makan fi qadim al-zaman." Let's hit play at the same time. 3, 2, 1.
كان يا مكان قديم.
كان يا مكان في قديم الزمان. Once upon a time, in the lands of Hadid, Shams was born, a descendant of the god of thunder and the goddess of the earth. The little girl Shams believes in all the good things in life and has a heart so big that it beats from her eyes. She is made of glass and water, and her hair is big and too wild to contain. Her home is in the middle of the Bustan, overlooking her favorite trees, the palm tree, the olive tree, and the pine tree. Oppressive concrete walls enclose her enclosure. But in Shams's world, people can fly, and the sky is the limit. One day, Shams was home. Her glass body was full of pure water, and her beating eyes were pumping with life. Shams wanted to draw, but there was no electricity in the house. So she sat down by the window and started drawing an image of a palm tree, tall and proud. As she was coloring in the red sky, suddenly, before Shams could figure out what had just happened, again, her glass vessel shattered into millions of pieces. The water spilled and spilled everywhere. The heart inside her eyes broke. Her lifeline flattened. already there. She put a strand of hair in her mouth, slowly sucking at the water absorbed in the shock. She felt better already. She looked down at her body and all she could see was broken glass everywhere. She looked up at the window and saw that it had broken too, and its pieces of glass were bigger and stronger than the ones that she had lost. Shams pulled the broken glass towards her, and she started to piece herself together from the neck down. Slowly, the water she drank made its way into this new makeshift vessel. It was enough for her roots to regenerate. Shams had managed to put herself back together again, enough to stand up and click her way towards the bustan, in search of anything that resembled what she knew. Shams now saw that her home was destroyed. The trees had their heads hanging down, as though defeated. She looked so different, so misshapen, vulnerable, naked, broken. No one could have recognized her. She stood in place, utterly confused. She finally saw the walls for what they were and felt trapped. Across the orchards, a young woman, Wafaa, came running towards her unafraid. Wafaa was made of silk and earth, with a rim of barbed wire covering her beautiful, gigantic mane. She said to Shams, "Habibti, don't be afraid. Everyone has survived. There was a bomb. In fact, there were 5. Shams's confusion began. Thoughts reeled her. What is a bomb? Why would they want to do this to me? Is it because of the palm tree? Did they use the wrong color? Is it because I'm made of glass and they wanted to break me? Is it because I should love less, run away, hate more, die? Is it because of my hair?" Wafaa was now picking off sheets of silk from the trees while silk moths fell to the ground all around her. She went to the oasis and soaked the silk in its water. She scooped up a handful of sand and held it tightly in her palms. She went to Shams and slowly started to patch her up. She polished the sharp, protruding glass with a handful of sand. And when Shams drained the dirty water from within her in an aftershock, she poured the pure water back into her vessel. Now the little girl Shams was not so little anymore. Her shape had changed. She was bigger, sturdier, looked stronger. She stood up and took a long stride coming into her new vessel. She looked at Wafaa and smiled. Her hair had dried and was like a crown atop her dome. Wafaa smiled back at Shams and she said, "You were broken, but fixed, renewed, transformed. Your soul is still intact. Guard your soul from the darkness of the void, but allow it to feel, fly, and love freely. Remember to breathe, accept, and believe. On the day Shams went into a rage. She roared into the sky. I want justice. Shams collapsed. Shifat stood beside her in silent agreement. Shams picked herself up. A tear dropped from her eye towards the petals of the rose leaf. At the moment that her tear hit that rose petal, the sun hit Shams directly and formed the most beautiful prism of light and color projected to her vessel. Shams's vessel turned into a mirror, reflecting all that is around her. Shams illuminated the whole world around her, and the trees burnt their heads and came back to their glory. And the trees started to sing. Do you guys know the song? You want to sing it? Anybody? Whoever knows the words. And with her feet planted in the earth, she tugged at her roots ever so slightly. And was now free.
That's great.
No, I couldn't see it in there. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
You want the musical interlude.
Thank you so much. Now we'll have Dena Al-Adeeb.
I feel like we messed up with the order. Let me say that. I think you should have ended. Should have gone after Wafaa. I think I'm
Dena, shift the.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, you can't.
sure. Marula, Madim.
Dena, are we playing anything on the projector?
We can. I don't know if we can. I'll have her attitude and be like, let's try that. But in a second, I'll let you know when to start. Thank you everyone for coming out and for hanging in there. Thank you to Kivo, to everyone who put this together. A special shout out to Afnan and Jannah and the entire team who made this happen. I know that this has been going on for a while, and the effort and the commitment and the love definitely has come through. So we're very grateful, and I feel honored to be sitting here with Ella, who's been my mentor for the last 8 years, and first time coming back as a not PhD student, but so I'm grateful for that. I'm also obviously honored to be presenting with Sundus and Wafaa. Both of them I've known for years and have been a big fan, and it's really truly an honor to be here again. So I really feel honestly like I'm going to ruin the mood, because after that, you know, I'm going to take it back to kind of, sorry Wafaa, let's go back to kind of where Wafaa was at. So I just feel like,
Trauma.
yeah, it's like, oh damn, we should have like practiced this, the three of us, because I really want to end with this. So, I'm really sorry. Can we play it again? Yeah, because I
So
feel
we
like,
can all calm down.
yeah, because I feel like saying like you took it perfectly well. Anyway, so I'll start here and then I'll tell you a little bit about it. This piece is called Disturbance. Oh yeah, sorry, let me cue up with you. So actually, before starting, this piece is called Disturbance. It's a triptych, so ideally at a gallery, you would see 3 videos playing simultaneously. For today, we'll be seeing it as a sequence, but keep in mind that actually the way you see this project is 3 different videos as a triptych called Disturbance. It's a trilogy. Each one is titled a year, so 1980, 1990, 2003. 1980 being the start of the Iraq-Iran war and my family's deportation from Iraq to Iran and our escape to Kuwait. So here we're talking about, or I'm talking about both kind of a collective history as well as a personal history. So, you know, keep in mind these are both about a very personal story, but yet obviously speaks about a larger collective story that I'm interested in narrating here. Then 1990, which is the invasion of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and then the U.S. invasion, the coalition forces, and the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the first round. And at the time, I was living in Kuwait because we had escaped from Iraq to Kuwait in 1980 and had to escape. I couldn't stay in Kuwait because I'm Iraqi, couldn't go back to Iraq because we were deported. Long story short, ended up being in the US, and this piece really, the second piece, 1990, speaks about the 90s, both on a personal level and a collective. I really focus here on the sanctions, not necessarily the bombing, right? So at least that's the feeling behind it. It's the sanction, the 13 years, deadly sanctions. And then the final was the 2003 invasion, US invasion, and the continuous occupation. I don't see it as sorry, but I don't see it as a post-conflict. I really think we're still in serious conflict. But I just have this language that we're just playing with. So I'll talk about it a bit more, so I want to play it for you. So this one that you're seeing, this is 1990. It's not in order, just aesthetically I did it this way, but just imagine again at a gallery, you would see them on big screens simultaneously. And you would hear the sound simultaneously. So the soundscape sounds very different because you're hearing right now the soundscapes separately. This was shown at Mana Contemporary in New Jersey. It was also part of a project that was it was called Between Spaces, and it was shown again later in 2014. So it was shown twice there. All right, let's see.
I think we lost it though.
No?
I think we might have lost it.
Also, there's the same space where you also film the dinner, the supper.
Yes, and yes, and I'll talk about that. All right.
Do you want
let's-
us to-
Yeah. So 1, 2.
Wait.
You tell me when to think. You want me? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Can we turn off the light? Is it possible? I'm so sorry. So this is 1990. I'm not sure if I said we're starting with 1990. This was shot in upstate New York at a abandoned mental health institution, an insane asylum. Yeah, insane asylum. We actually broke in and went inside, and very interesting. There's squatters there, so they weren't there when we entered because we were there early in the day. But it was obviously there was squatters. To me, this really was, I was trying to really focus on the sanctions specifically. I mean, obviously the war, but the sanctions, because it went on for, 13 years and over 1 million child died because of the sanctions. And this felt like it was representative for many different reasons. This door that's locked, that's, kind of impossible to penetrate. And, it's a dead end, basically, right? Knowing that actually it's nothing inside, it's also hollow. Sorry? Oh, yes. So you're trying to escape, right? But it's actually you're going into a haunted space that's completely empty and abandoned. This is 1980. And for me, this was specifically focused on Halabja, which was a massacre by the Iraqi government, by the Ba'athist government that was supported by the U.S., funded and supported through intelligence. The location of the targets were given by the CIA, financially funded. Anyways, so this specific project for me really is reminiscent of that specific period, 1980, and the Halabja massacre, where thousands of Kurds were executed and many ended up being displaced and had to walk through the mountains into Iran and Turkey. At the same time, it's also very personal because I was also deported in 1980. My whole entire family actually was. I had cousins who were executed and were in jail and for many years, and their bodies found after the Ba'ath regime was actually no longer in power. So, it's again part of a larger collective narrative and a very personal one. And that's really interesting because it was an abandoned gas station, references to obviously oil, the industrialization of the north and changing into kind of an oil, the oil refineries and the importance of especially Mosul at the time, and it still is today, So I was trying to kind of make also that link between this has been going on for many years, for 40 years, actually more than 40 years, but at least the conflict, quote unquote, the visible conflict has been going on for 40 years. So the issue between, the conflict between Mosul in the south and Baghdad is not something that was, produced post-conflict as part of a sectarian violence and conflict. This is something that is obviously has roots all the way back to the British and the British Empire and their engineering, like using my PhD. Research basic title, the engineering of Iraq and the region, right, where Mosul becomes a port, Basra
and Baghdad being, three different kind of ports of entry for the empire, and the continuation of that by the U.S. This is 2003, and the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And if you notice, it's in reverse, and she's holding. So I'm performing it, by the way. She's holding, or I am holding, a barbed wire that she's untangling, but it's in reverse. So it's kind of this looped, twerked attempt at making sense of very disfigured and distorted reality. Right. And again, keep in mind you're seeing all these, on big screens simultaneously. So the soundscape also is very different, because right now you're hearing it as a sequence. Also show, so like I said, this was first shown in 2013 at Mana, and then again in 2014 part of a solo larger project. So I want to show you all three projects that I showed, because it was part of an entire narrative that I was trying to speak about. And we could, let's see. So the Taste of Displacement, which you already saw, but I'm only showing the first few minutes because I really want to talk about something specific here, so we're not seeing the entire thing. So it's very long, it's 20 minutes. So again, this was a project, it's an ongoing project, it's a multi-city project. It's called the Taste of Displacement. I started in New York. Next year we're doing Detroit, and we're working right now on a London-based one. And it's about, it's really trying to produce. One is, I feel like it's a feminist intervention, but it's a project that's about reconceptualizing our understanding of Iraq's collective history, issues of remembrance, and repertoire. I invited basically Iraqis in New York. Most of them are actually New Yorkers, but some of them actually came from out of town. Artists, writers, academics, curators, there's a chef, there's a waitress, all in their daily practice are dealing with issues related to Iraq. Probably except for the waitress, I would say, because she was doing something else at the time. But everyone else who was there, who was invited, was invited because their daily practice, whether it's through food making, and they're working on a cookbook, there's a Metallica band, also Iraqi. So there's all these different folks who are working on Iraq on a daily issues related to Iraq on a daily basis, and invite them to come spend a few days together cooking, collectively cooking, and an Iraqi, ask them to bring with them an Iraqi recipe, and then collectively cook it, and then sit down over a meal. So they weren't necessarily prepared per se to have certain conversations. It was very participatory in that way.
Yep, because we don't have it taste like it. Because we don't have mixables. This is why we're making this
Okra tastes like. We had like a gumbo kind of a thing.
Yeah.
New Orleans dish.
Yeah.
So.
I was trying to remember what okra was saying.
Right? But that's a very popular dish. The trick to it is the sliminess of it. So.
Spicy?
No, not this one. I'm not making it spicy. But just cutting the ends off.
Yeah.
So it doesn't release some of that slime Actually, that's not true. I'm following directions here.
I need more spices. I do everything by color. I need more turmeric. I need a dollop of this tomato paste right here. More black pepper. I just thought I saw curry in there, and this is a vegetarian one that really needs it. I guess I could just make it curry. Cinnamon. Coriander, no. Black pepper. A big dollop of this tomato paste. 1.5 maybe.
This project, I think,
You know how to wrap? I haven't done it for a while. I need to demonstrate.
this project, I was really interested in hearing. I was really interested in building community. You know, as Iraqis, we feel like we don't have these conversations amongst ourselves, right? We're dealing with this horrific silence and trauma. Like obviously, you know, Wafaa and Sundus elaborate on that very well. And we are obviously marginalized within a larger society and are forced to deal with it individually. And I was really interested in bringing folks who are actually, like I said, who are thinking about these issues through their daily practice, but they're looking at it from different angles possibly. And how do they come together and spend a day together cooking, and what kind of conversations they end up having? So it really was about building a community and having a larger narrative, a collective narrative that's different than what we usually do or have because of the specificities of it, the people who are there at the table.
One part that's religion and one part that's tradition, right? Because we're not to judge like religions that weren't raised with the knowledge of God, right? So like say native peoples or whatever. It's not for us to understand but to know, to be raised and to know that God exists and then to deny it anyway means that you think you're above God. That's law. I mean, there's a lot of things that are sin.
And I think also, like I said, I see this as a feminist intervention because we're talking about food. We are talking about, domestic space because we are talking about a very intimate and there's an intimacy here, right? I just want you to hear this.
But it's really hard one. We talk about like these sort of esoteric arts that are, require one to be of a certain taste or education and they tend to divide based on class. Certain forms of art that appeal to particular groups of people, and food seems to be one of these, not least common denominator, but one that sort of can transcend cultural or socio-economic. It's a certain boundary.
And by the way, that was Amir Safa. He's an incredible musician. He's playing tonight at the Lincoln Center. Some of us are going to try to go there later. So he's an incredible musician. Look him up. He's a dear friend. Obviously, that's partly why I'm promoting. But really, I was also interested in food because of what Amir said. I was interested in a form and a practice that was accessible to everyone, and everyone can actually relate to it and make sense to it, right? And the reason for the multi-city was because I was trying to build community because we are, living all transnationally, right? And that these conversations look very differently in different cities, and how do they kind of sound and look like once you look at them collectively. So ideally, this is, like I said, an ongoing project. Right now we have New York, Detroit, and London is still in the making, and it will continue to happen eventually. I'd love to do it in Iraq. But the idea is to build kind of an archive, right, of these different conversations as a way to access these diasporic communities, as well as an archive that actually is about a repertoire. How much time do I have? Now, okay. So I'll just end with one thing, if I may, because I don't want to. want you to hear the whole thing. I just want to share a few seconds. Is my turn like that? Sorry. This project's called Dissonance, and I'll talk about it in a second.
For a new world order now within our reach. In the coming weeks, I'll be talking in some detail about the possibility of a new world order emerging after the Cold War. But today, I want to discuss another aspect of that order. You see, as the Cold War drew to an end, we saw the possibilities of a new order in which nations work together. It refers to new ways of working with other nations to deter aggression and to achieve stability. As old threats recede, new threats emerge. The quest for the new world order is in part a challenge to keep the dangers of disorder at bay. We must build on the successes of Desert Storm to give new shape and momentum to this new world order. Only when this transition
Play this while I just wrap it up. So Dissonance is a sound project. I was invited by a curator in LA to create a soundscape for a walk between two galleries for an artist. It was two solo projects at two different galleries, and she asked 6 artists to share short soundscapes. There's actually 30. Mine, I think, is one of the longest ones of issues related to conflict, war, and trauma. So both, internationally as well as locally. And so this piece actually deals with, obviously, Iraq, but some of the pieces which I'm not sharing right now focus on some of the violence that was, the inner city violence that was happening in LA, the riots, Rodney King. So this piece, because the larger project was about racism and xenophobia and deportation. So I was really interested in highlighting both what was happening locally and as it relates to what's happening internationally, and how actually, the war is not just happening in Iraq, but it's happening here in LA, in New York, in San Francisco, as we see today play out, obviously, with Trump being in power. I'll end here because of time. Thank you so much.
Okay with you guys?
Thank you all for this amazing presentation. Dena. I think we, at least I can speak for myself, went through an incredible range of emotions. Experiencing with you the traumas that we were talking about. Obviously, for some of us, at least here, we have our own memories of traumas, but also with you thinking through ways of healing and ways of refusing to abandon what we are told, especially for people living here, because I think this is actually an important point because we're also speaking about displacement and diaspora. What are the connections to Iraq that are being maintained through your artwork, through your cultural practices? So maybe I will open with a general question addressed to all of you, and then we can have the audience ask you questions. So the key question, because I also wanted to highlight the issue of Iraqis living outside of Iraq. Some of you raised in Iraq, others have been displaced in childhood, others grew up outside of Iraq. Nonetheless, there is always an attempt that I see throughout your work, even though it's very different work, through different genres, different means. All of you in some ways are concerned also with the body, which I thought was fascinating, because it's not necessarily completely obvious that because you are discussing war and dislocation, that the body would be foregrounded in so many different ways. And I think it was, for me, actually something that I was struck with, how you want to talk about your own bodies, your own dislocation, while also remembering and talking about the different emotional and bodily traumas that Iraqis themselves have been experiencing, and in some ways highlighting your connection to the place through your bodily experience, or representing the body being shot at, or representing the body facing a dead end gate, or speaking about the body through an allegory of Shams and the desire to grow again. So from all of you, I got also a sense of wanting to think about building communities in diaspora through a dialogue, but also retaining that deep connection to Iraq. So if you could just make a comment in relation to that, and then we can have...
I could start. I mean, there are a few topics here you just mentioned: the body, diaspora, building community, and I'm gonna start with the idea of how the artwork is different, since usually artwork during conflict and war, it's a record. My work specifically, I could address that. It's not just a record. It meant to agitate, it meant to inform, it meant to engage us as well, beside being a record. So one thing I, from early on in the work, figure out that is, my audience are not moved by the story. And it has everything to do with the geographical distance that generate emotional one. So obviously performance and unmediated media and the body become the central place in the stage, because the body has its own language, and the pain could transform from the artist's body to the audience immediately, because it is unmediated. In terms of
and through the audience, I think you were also trying to build a kind of, to mediate a possible identification with what Iraqis are experiencing, and desanitize the kind of media reportage about Iraq where that possible identification is hardly felt.
Absolutely. I mean, the media really does not filter the entire story of Iraq, and it's so obvious. It was clinically clean when it arrived here. So from with the artwork and the project I've done, I'm trying to engage and solicit emotion, solicit empathy, sympathy with the Iraqi, and transform the viewer into a foreign ground. I think the connection between me, myself, and Iraq is really never ever broken. I have my entire family to this day there, and I felt there is a sense of urgency and responsibility to connect these two places, and not necessarily to impose, but really rather to trigger a platform and allow people to speak their own minds to arrive to conclusion or information. So the work changed from didactic to a dynamic in its nature, and I become very much a reflection of what is taking place in Iraq, and I think that's where the issue I mentioned at the very end of my talk, where the post-conflict start showing in my own work.
I would like to add something about diaspora that you mentioned. When Jannah, can you hear me?
Just leave the microphone.
Okay, sorry. So when you guys first approached and sent the description of this event and you wanted me to be a part of it, I said, listen, originally it was about Iraqi art since 2003. I said it's really important to make the distinction that this is Iraqi art and diaspora, because the experience of Iraqi artists living in Iraq is completely different, completely and utterly different. Their infrastructure is different, their mobility is different. Most Iraqi artists will not be able to get a visa to come to New York to do a panel. They face restrictions in many ways, but nevertheless, they're so resilient and so inspiring, and there's actually an amazing community right now. Shout out to an independent festival happening recently called Tarkib that have been doing some really inspiring work, and I think that's really important for us as Iraqi artists in the diaspora to create those connections, because there's such a vacuum there. For decades, Iraqi artists have been not involved in any biennial, but Dena Al-Adeeb's not involved in any of the international art scenes. Only in the past 10 years, I would say, people have been doing the work, and it takes work to bridge the gap, to create those connections. Regine Sahapian did amazing through her work with Sada, Echo, which isn't functional right now, but she started the wheels going. So I felt that it was important for us to mention that we are Iraqi artists in the diaspora, but that there is still such a beautiful community that is doing work in Iraq. It's interesting you mentioned our responsibility as artists to Jawad Salim, the pioneer of Iraqi art, wrote in a manifesto in the 50s, it is our duty as Iraqi artists to interpret and depict current events in our society. And that's something that's part of our artistic heritage. And I feel like as Iraqi artists, it's like in our DNA to kind of take that approach. At least for me, it was a big inspiration when I read that. I was like, yes, and your comment on body, I never thought of that, because before Shams, I never implicated myself in my work. I was never involved, and even just reading the story publicly is something very new to me. I usually just do the work, put it out there, and I don't ever physically embody it.
Although mutilated bodies and bodies under attack are in your previous work as well.
Absolutely, but never my own body, which is, I find something very interesting about Dena and Wafaa's work, and seeing how they are part of their art in a very physical embodiment. I think that connection is very interesting. Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out how implicated I can be with my own.
Well, you are. Whether you like it or not.
Eventually.
I mean, You've said it all. I mean, I think the only thing I'm going to add that was, I guess, an impression or an insight that I'll share is when I first saw your project, is it in Counting? The back project?
Yeah.
When I first saw it, when it first came out, and when I saw it today, it made me realize that, I mean, I knew this to some degree, but it really hit me today, the parallel work that we've been doing. There's a project called Beirut Baghdad, and there's one specific one called Windmills and Giant, where aesthetically, I mean, I just really kind of, I mean, I feel it in my body while I was seeing it. Basically what the project is, and I didn't share it, I was thinking about sharing it, but I didn't. Windmill and Giant is basically, it's my back, and someone is cupping my back, but not the old school with tearing the skin with like this, you know, with a razor, but it's with just fire and alcohol, so you get a suction when you put it on your back without the cut, right? So I don't know, just to maybe I'm assuming people know this. So not only it's a tradition. It's actually a Chinese tradition, medicine tradition, and Iraqis used to do it. My parents had it. My grandparents had it. We didn't do it. By my generation, it ended. But basically, you would cut the back, there's like slits, and then you would get cups, and you would put alcohol, you know, rub alcohol, and then, you know, you create a suction, and then the blood starts flowing. And I still do cupping today, and I've been doing it for years, but I just don't do the slitting. Because by doing that, you're actually, you know, having intense circulation around those specific spots. And so this project, Windmills and Giant, is basically all you see is my back, and the cupping is happening, and someone is drawing on my back these specific connections, and we're narrating these stories about the relationship between body, space, and memory. So the conversation is about Baghdad and two other cities, and this conversation, and all you see, if like I'm obviously telling you about the project, but if you see it, you would never know it's actually a back or that it's skin. So it's very kind of poetic and very kind of abstract. All you see is you know, there's a point towards the end where you start thinking, oh, it's skin. Oh, it could be what part of your body is this? The only reason you see that because of the breathing, right? Like you can see so anyways, so that specific project just made me realize that actually that there's many other projects that I've always thought that our works have been kind of in parallel conversation. So this is great that you bring this up, because I really feel and felt it today strongly that that's something that I want to explore further as a conversation between us in a written piece or in a potential project in the future. So just, that's all I have to say.
May I add something about the body? I really never thought about the body as a medium until after shooting Iraqi, domestic tension. And when it was brought to my attention in the book Shooting Iraqi, I started looking back where that is coming from. It's not only a Western influence from performance to commemorate, but rather from our own culture, growing up in Najaf and in Kufa, where the Shia commemorate their history through these rituals, whether cutting themselves or flying themselves. So immediately after that, I start associating the practice with the past and how the past influence our present practices.
Thank you so much. Now let's have some comments and questions. Maybe first questions before comments. Anyone? Yes, I can see a hand.
Yeah. So I have two questions.
Maybe if you could just say your name.
Yeah, my name is Anthony. The one question is, you mentioned that the artists in Iraq are kind of doing work that is different from, let's say, your work in the diaspora. So I was wondering, like, what is the difference exactly, and what do you see just visually? Is it, and what are the themes that they're kind of depicting that you kind of focusing on something different, and what are the medias they're using? And then the second question is, just because I've been reading a lot about like Iraqi literature recently, and we tend to like a lot focus on the things that happened in the past, or like wars. And I was wondering if you could predict like what is Iraqi art in the diaspora going to be like in 10 years from now? What are the themes that we're going to focus on?
Anybody got a copy?
Yeah, so, thank you.
I meant that our work is different in experience. Our experience is different. And I feel like in Iraq, it's diverse as much as we're diverse. And yeah, I can't speak on that because it's like asking me to also generalize something that's so diverse as Iraq is from north to south, you know. But I will say that recently I felt that there's more of a critical and conceptual and critical approach. There's been a lot of really interesting conversations between Lebanese artists and Iraqi artists. And Lebanon has a very interesting, I won't say similar, very different. Each country in the Middle East is so different, right? We know this very well. But there has been some interesting residencies of Iraqi artists happening in Lebanon, and you can see their work transform and their ability to articulate their experience with the war. But it's impossible to predict and impossible to generalize, which makes it so exciting.
I'll add something to this. I've been frequently going back to Iraq and in dialogue with the Iraqis on the ground. And I think it's a complicated question when it comes to just like what's the difference. But we have to mention a few things. Once, the isolation, which Dena, I think, talked about during the embargo, which lasted about 13 or more years. With that, it was completely blocked out and isolated the artists inside, and that basically let or force the artists to specifically use a specific medium, which is anything available. Second, and that comes to the medium, but we have to remember who are the audience. And I mentioned the work, what is the objective? One, work for the Iraqis, not only to inform each other because they are in the middle of the conflict. I think it functioned as a record. And I remember Carol Becker asked me when she said, when you were in the camp or in Iraq or here, why did you paint? And I said, I just wanted to make sure I'm still alive. And for Iraqis, a lot of them, they wanted to make sure their creativity doesn't die. So they use whatever medium available. Now, as Sundus mentioned, really there is a very different movement in Iraq, and I have to say, and the difference here coming from the country is opening up, the internet is arriving, and the satellite TVs, and traveling. None of that during Saddam's regime was possible. Now you could see Iraqi art within Iraq is shaping up to be very different.
Yeah, and I just would add to that. I mean, you know, your comparison between the period of Saddam and now, it also impacts the relationship between the diaspora and the people who live in Iraq, because the links and the connections are much more possible. So this is now than they were before. I mean, this is the tragic consequences. It's the ironic consequences of the tragedy of the war, but the connections now, the circulation is much more possible now. So the relationship between the art of the diaspora and the art produced in Iraq is also mutually informed and constituted.
And also the wave of Iraqi artists in diaspora going back and doing workshops.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It's taking place throughout Iraq, and it's really not just art.
Yeah,
In
cinema,
every
music,
single field, creative and non-creative as well, when it comes to so many other things that Iraq needs.
Yeah.
It's very inspiring.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Noor. Wafaa, you were just saying, and I think that you both kind of addressed this a little bit, but this idea of like who is the audience that different people are like thinking about when making work, or who people have the opportunity to exhibit to. And I think that's something that I, as an Iraqi, find really frustrating about Iraqi art, is that so much of what I see is very like trying to undo assumptions that are made about Iraq, like so much like negation within creation, and I'm just wondering if there are like artists that you think about that are doing something different, and also like obviously there's sort of the difficult like place of having to respond to your present history that's unfolding, but also not be defined by it, So it's a very general question.
Thank you. Dena, yes.
Yeah, it's complex. I mean, this is a hard one for me. So I'm going to say something, and I know it's going to sound funny. I try not to think about the audience. I try not to, and I know that, and probably this is why I didn't talk about audience. Both of you have talked about audience, and I think not that I'm oblivious. I feel like I'm aware, but I feel like I try not to because one is, I'll give you examples. One is the Taste of Displacement. To me, that's not about an audience. If I was thinking about an audience, it would not be about bringing Iraqis and having them sit and cook for a day or 2 or 3 and then sit down and have a conversation. People are not necessarily interested in that. But actually, among the contemporary, what the curator and the gallerist asked me to do is to invite an audience and have an outside audience to come and be part of the performance. And we negotiated back and forth, and I did not want that because it just, for many different reasons that I found problematic. And at the end, the compromise was that they can be there, but they would not participate. I think you saw from the conversations, if you saw the video up here, from the conversations, that issue came up, right? This feels like a performance that we're sitting and there's an audience watching us that's kind of repeating that same kind of discourse that we find problematic. So that's this is something that I think about a lot. And so in that specific project, it came out very visibly. In the other projects, I feel like they're very personal, and I think it is about the body and performance is for me at least. It's about an part of it is it's my an art practice that's about a very personal story, and therefore it's not necessarily about looking at an audience or trying to understand how the audience is going to react to it. So those pieces I feel like are this is when I say I don't really try to think through about the audience, but obviously with pieces like the Taste of Displacement, I have to think about it, even though I find it complicated to think through. But yeah, I try in general try not to.
Do you want to say something?
I just want to say something quickly, and it might be a little bit controversial, but there's a lot of copying in the Iraqi art scene. I mean, there's copying in general in all art scenes, but I feel like there's a lot of copying. Don't you guys ever notice
I think there's also trends.
Trends and copying, and there is like something that ends up
I
happening.
refer to as an inspiration.
Isn't that what art is then?
Yeah.
It's no. I think it's kind of more complicated than that, and I think it's a result of the embargo and a result of the isolation, and a result of a very, very closed art scene for decades. So there's been it's complex. So
You're talking about within Iraq specifically?
In general, in the diaspora too, in Amman, in different places, there is a complex community. I know this because my mother's an artist and she comes from a generation before me, so I've witnessed it. I've observed it for many, many years. The trends and the artists. It's interesting to observe it, but it might be controversial.
I think that's why I do performances, tattoos, and then people shoot me. Nobody could copy.
You can't copy that. Yeah, and copyright it.
I wanted to address your questions. Obviously, we cannot separate ourselves from who we are, and to me, always we are really mirrors reflecting a social condition, right? So when I am about to do project, unlike Dina, I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
I need to know who are my audiences, because part of it, I am speaking about a land that is very far. How do I reach the audience, the one I exist with? And one way is to understand where they come from and take the issue and filter it through the local language. And what I mean by language, take for example, Shooting Iraqi. It was provocative. It was not even called Shooting Iraqi on the site, called Domestic Tension. And all what it was, a very playful project. It became a water cooler dialogue about shooting a guy on the internet. And it was intriguing. But think about the layers that's being used. The internet, paintball, and these are local things, specifically paintball. It's very American, right? And then the connectivity and the playfulness. So once people, and I refer to that as an aesthetic pain, once people cross that, they, aesthetic pleasure, once they cross the surface of these projects, they arrive to the aesthetic pain, which is really the meaning of these projects. But I never shy of being an Iraqi. I think I'm to me, it's just like, I think that what made me different than really the others. But you're right, when we trying to undo what other people really done to the places we came from.
Yeah, we have another question. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious because the way I see, I haven't seen, Iraqi's artists much, so I'm not very much educated about it. But there's a feeling that, right now in the art world, there's an expectation of the Middle Eastern to create and produce a very certain kind of imagery that they want to associate with. If you paint or create art similar as one American New Yorker figure, as if that you're not an artist or if you're not an important artist for them. Do you feel that pressure as well? As other Middle Eastern that I know that they are, because there is a very certain kind of imagery and dialogue that is picked up and shown in galleries. And
I blame the curator.
You what?
I blame the curators.
Yeah, but it is what those institutions are asked, I guess, or they are interested. You see the collection in Metropolitan Museum in the Islamic part. Go and see that what is picked up. Recently I was in LA, in Hammer Museum. It was an awful exhibition of Iranian art. Awful. But, like that they had a truck loaded with the work of one artist, but everything that he produced for them, So I really don't know what's going on.
I think it's exotic to have an image of the Middle East that reflect the Middle East or the idea of the Middle East. So that is not surprise when we're talking about an institution that make a profit out of the visitor. So, but I think the really important thing about that, there is no one art, and we have to understand the economy of the artists, how these artists make living. If the gallery, museums demand certain type of work, the artists go on to do to survive. And I think that's what Sundus said about copying each other. Once thing is popular, you see other people coming. But for us, and luckily, we don't make a living, at least I am.
No.
I don't make a living out of the artwork, but rather out of teaching. This gives me the economic freedom to really do what I wanted to do without listening to the commercial side of art making.
With
Right.
integrity. Yeah.
Sorry, but just to reflect, I'm sorry, but I can see that, I mean, those that are in diaspora, they are more educated or whatever to at least be aware of that, but you're talking about just started opening. These kind of views, how it's going to affect the regrowth and recreation of art inside when they do see that, what they like, and then they're going to start like a factory to produce the same thing that they wanted.
The only thing I would add is because of my frustration with curators and institutions, and having been in situations where my work has been censored, or been in situations where I've had rejections not based on the merit of my work, but on other factors, I started curating myself, and I started doing pop-ups and not having to go through, the system, and really just doing it independently. And that's a very empowering thing to do as an artist curator. Create spaces and say, okay, there's a void happening here, or there is something that a voice that isn't being given an opportunity to speak. Let's make that space, and that's one way I've learned to combat that frustration with the system, with the institution, with all of these.
Yeah, go.
My name is Abbas. I'm a PhD student at Rutgers. Thank you so much for the organizer and for panels. It's great panels. I really like it. I'm going to tell you, I'm starting with my personal story, which is a very, very tragic story. It happened in Baghdad, where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in Medina Thawra, which they call it now like a Saudi city.
And it was Saddam City before.
It was Saddam City before that.
After Thawra.
But in 2008, I woke up, I found my dad's body in front of my home. What happened? They called the snipers killed him. The American sniper killed him. Why? I don't know why. Because I used to go to the Baghdad University where I teach and teach my students every day. Before I go back to my school, I sit with my dad. But I wake up on my mom screaming. I rushed my dad's body. I found he was bleeding. And then I asked my cousins, who was only 16 years old, to help me to grab my dad's body inside my home. And the sniper shot us again. And he kills my cousins. And I lay down on my dad's body for more than 40 minutes. That's what's meaning like a post-traumatic stress disorder. I suffer from that, but what I have did, I decided at this moment to come to the United States to study. How? I have no idea. I don't have nothing. I don't know how. I have a master's degree from Baghdad in political science, but I have to go. My mom said no, I said yes. It took me more than 6 years to get out of Baghdad to come here, to find some fun, to contact some professors here. It's a very long story. I know it's a long story short, but that's what people inside suffering. There is a disconnect between like Iraqi diaspora, because I didn't consider myself as a part from diaspora. Still I have a student visa. I have to go back to teach because I have something. I have a contract. I have my job there, but we perceive that. I'm sorry about that, because the broad Iraq invasions, the most of the diaspora, it's an undebatable issue. When I try to teach my students in the future, that I tell them about the Iraqi diaspora, they will say, "Oh, these are guys who they support or really broad Iraqi invasions." That's a very popular. They will say that. Nobody can argue against them because they said that, and that what happened. We don't have we didn't define this moment. This is a turning point. In 2003, it is a turning point. Thank you, Dena. Dena is a little bit referred to something like supporting Saddam or funding Saddam or the CIA, all this stuff. They know nothing about that. They know nothing. They said, okay, no. That's one cost. That's comment my question to Sundus about the justice. She said about the justice. Like Shams wants justice from where? Justice never exists on this earth. I don't know. I don't think the justice here. The injustice exists. Okay, but justice it's really interesting. I talk about the diaspora, and this is a very interesting. But I didn't find in all your art, like. If we agree or not, Iraq is an empire of evil. That's what the people who they running this country said, and they believe in that. It is an empire of evil. How to redefine this issue? I was shocked when I read about the Iraq war literatures and find all these these people who they believe Iraq is still a kingdom of evil, and all these Iraqi, they are evil people, and we have to get rid of them all. If we don't get rid of them, we have to send gathering all these evil people in Iraq because we want them to come to Iraq and I didn't find some connection between these. Like, for example, I don't know which one who's for these pictures for the Tower of Babel. And this picture is very popular when you read about the Iraq war literatures. Why they go to Iraq? They said no, it's not about the oil. It's not about oil. I don't think it's about the oil. It's nothing. And it's about 9/11. It's emotional reactions about 9/11, but they find nothing. There's no links between 9/11 and Iraq. And that's these themes or these themes I didn't find these themes. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Let them. Thank you.
I don't.
Let them respond to. Yeah.
أولاً الله يرحم أبوك, and thank you for sharing your story. And I think it's important to just give that space. ثانياً, about justice, I'm still looking for it, but that won't stop me from asking for it. Then you should make that art that you're looking for.
I'm not an artist.
None of us were once upon a time.
Shukran, Afwan.
Yeah. What can I say after that? There's a question.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just refer to the question that, about if I understood you correctly, the diaspora connected to the Iraq war, and it will be remembered as being part of the war. Obviously, there is no one diaspora. There were people who were marching against the war. They didn't like Saddam Hussein, but they nonetheless marched against the war because it was not about choosing between one good side and one evil side, as it was represented, as you well suggested, in terms of the media. So there was also, certainly the people, I can testify to the people here, were sitting in opposition to this war. So even what we say, the exiled Iraqi community, depends whom we're talking about.
And can I just make one comment to this? It's really, I do work with the Iraqi diaspora in London, and really there is a very limited number of people like Ahmed Chalabi and Ayad Alawi who were part of the diaspora, who influenced who had the ear of the U.S. officials. But there were so many people in the Iraqi diaspora in London who were against the war, who marched against the war, who sent letters to the State Department saying, don't rely on the diaspora, they don't know anything, and they have their own agenda, they have a sectarian discourse, and this is very problematic, but the US officials wanted to really just listen to a certain segment of the diaspora, but that we can't just conflate everybody.
I'm not generalizing here.
Yeah.
I'm saying well, the people inside Iraq, they perceive it. It's a public opinion there. The public perceive all the Iraqi diaspora as a pro-war, like it was invasion, not a problem. From there, it's a very hard thing to do like this.
Sure.
That's why I think that some of the Iraqi diaspora, they try to get being very away from the politics. They say we don't want to be away from politics because if we engage in politics, you have to
Thank you. Yeah, you do this.
My name is Amar. Thank you. This is incredible. So I'm excited to be here. I guess I have one question or comment or question. how do you think about the everyday life inside Iraq when you do or think about your art? And, I ask that question because I think one of the themes of the conference is this idea of beyond conflict and beyond trauma, and kind of amidst all of that, you kind of have these daily goings on, the kind of everyday aspects of life inside Iraq. And kind of one of the things I'm thinking about is particularly around the sanctions era, for the 13 years under sanction, and there are kind of countless stories that I haven't actually seen written about in kind of academic works, and I think is kind of really ripe for really raw oral histories of that period, and would be exciting for someone to work on. Or how kind of people endured that period. So less about the kind of hard border between the outside and the inside. This kind of sanctions kind of occluding whatever Iraqi access to the outside world, but actually kind of how people were operating on a daily basis inside Iraq. Just one example. You had essentially people kind of literally kind of stripping their homes of any material that had any kind of value in order to sell it, and any kind of copper, any metals, just kind of sell and pay to
a lot of art.
And art, yeah. And just to kind of last point on this, I think is an interesting point because it actually draws a very important connection between pre-2003 and post. For example, around the looting of Baghdad. So people were looting. The idea of taking and selling the stuff for hard currency to then live their lives. And I just wonder, so the question there is, how do we think about the everyday, or how do you think about the everyday, maybe outside, if you can even get outside this idea of trauma and conflict, and how people kind of endure all that?
Thank you.
So, I have so much to say, but I'm trying to be succinct about it. I think what I have a hard time with, let me start with this, is this, insider outsider, right? This like diaspora versus, and I think it's much more complex than that. And as we know, and I feel like, at least for us, the people on the panel are people who, I think maybe I should speak for. I mean, I feel like I know them long enough to say this, but I'll speak about it. I find it hard for me to be categorized as part of just a diaspora that's removed from the daily reality of Iraqis. Both my lived experience and I know Wafaa's lived experience, specifically that our daily life is, until today, to some degree, right, has been shaped by specific things that happened in Iraq and continue to happen in Iraq, right? For example, like I said, I was deported in 1980. My cousins were killed. We were, long story. I did a B in Kuwait. Now I'm in the U.S. But for example, my mom right now just left 2 weeks ago to Iraq to finally try to sell one of, her house, right? So I mean, this is
After how many years?
40 years. Okay, I was 5 years old. So for me, I'm just giving you a very silly and very insignificant example. I mean, I find it significant because it's about, but it's very symbolic, okay? So when I was 5 years old, I was in that house, okay? My mom, until today, cries every day and is severely depressed. Every day, I have to hear this conversation about how she was stripped away from her house, how she was stripped away from her family, how she was, so this, to at least someone like me, it is not removed, right? Including, I have aunts there, I have an uncle, I have 2 aunts, and each story is very much alive with me on a daily basis. So for me, it's not something removed. I mean, if I may say something about Wafaa, because I don't know if you're going to say this, and I think it's, if you don't mind. Wafaa, for example, and I know Wafaa for a long time, Wafaa was one of the people who had to march on foot, from Baghdad to Saudi Arabia, and he was in a refugee camp, These things, this work is not coming from people whose life has been so removed, from the reality. We daily embody this, right? When someone lives through a refugee camp, and I'm sorry if I'm saying this, I feel like, like he's my brother, I know very well. You don't forget these things, and obviously that's comes through the work. So it's hard to have these conversations in this kind of, black and white dichotomous way. Now I understand Abbas على عيني وراسي, and I understand people in Iraq, even my own cousins tell me, oh نيالك انت والله طالعة ومن زمان وش عليك, because they're,
the envy of the diaspora.
The envy of the diaspora. Oh, من 40 سنة انت طالعة ورحتي تعلمتي وصار عندك دكتوراه وددا. I understand that, and I'm not negating that. I'm very clear, but I'm saying I think this is part of this conversation. It's much more nuanced, obviously, and we are all aware of that. And I just didn't want to say anything because I feel like it's I don't know, maybe you can say, you've written about this, several books. But just one last thing, I want to just end by saying this, just one last thing. I think also like what Ella said, I spent 5 years of my life, I quit my job and I was making, whatever, I had a really good salary, I had a good career, I gave up everything, and for 5 years, I was an anti-war organizer and a non-profit, and I spent 5 years, that's all I did. That's all I did. I slept 2 hours a night, and that's all I did. So I'm not saying that to be like, well, I did this or that, but I'm saying that, there are so many narratives and so many layers to our lived experiences that don't come through. And you're seeing very, very, very minimalist highlights that give you, snippets of things that we think about, and I think that's why our work has a lot to do with body, because we embody this, we embody the trauma, right? Not only our trauma, but a collective trauma, right? So, anyways, yes.
No, I just want to mention a couple of things. One, I think once we cross the ocean, really from that moment we belong to two places. One, we exist in emotionally, and the other physically. I really don't remember I've ever been disconnected from Iraq or Iraq issue on a daily basis. And I think for the last about 25 years, it was, you can see that as really a reflection. And I don't think we had ever the privilege to meditate on anything but pain. Right? And the last thing, I really don't think, I didn't leave by choice. And it's a big difference when you are forced from home by a regime you despise, but you stand on the street of Chicago and say no to war. Because the objective of the war never was Saddam. It was way bigger than that.
Right, and it wasn't a choice between the U.S. and
Exactly.
Iraq. And I think that's for many people, Iraqis who marched against the war. Again, it was not about valorizing Saddam or the U.S. for that matter, right? Yeah, and we have time just for one last question. Please.
I was actually wondering, Sundus, if you can talk about that image that you said we can ask you about in the Q&A.
Oh, yeah, Inanna in Damascus.
Okay.
Right. And the censorship story.
They want the juice.
Yeah, you want to okay, so basically I made this painting as a response to, there was a call out for an exhibition to take an Orientalist or primitivist or, basically a work by a white man in the 1800s, and as a woman of color, reinterpret it. So I chose Jean-Léon Gérôme's The Slave Market, and it was 2007, and at the height of the Iraqi refugee crisis, when there were hundreds of thousands of refugees in Syria and in Jordan. And there was a very, very taboo and little known story that there was a very serious sex trade of very young girls. So there's like the sex trade, and then there's like the 9-year-old girls being sold. And not a lot of people were talking about it, and I thought it was something really important. And not just was it something important on a humanitarian level, but it was also important on a political level, because you had all of these different stakes involved. You had, neighboring countries and Gulf countries and all, and then to find the research for this painting, there was no article out there. There was one article written by the very obscure thing, and then what I had to do is I went on YouTube and I looked up videos, And there were cell phone videos of Saudi men in, dingy hotel rooms with young Iraqi prostitutes. And it really boggled my mind. And I did an artwork about it. It was called Inanna in Damascus. And Inanna is a Sumerian goddess of war and fertility. She's also known as Ishtar, also known as Aphrodite, Venus. So she kind of ended up representing these young girls, but also Iraq, being exploited, being raped, being sold, being, by her neighbors in a sense. So I made the painting. I really believed in it as something that was bigger than me, and its message was bigger than me. But then it got picked up by an Arabic newspaper. The first one, Ilaf, they wrote about it very nicely. Talked about the issues as I talked to you about them, because he actually interviewed me and used my interview. But then that article got picked up by Al-Arabiya, and he called me and did another interview. And the article came out that I was a Canadian artist bent out on destroying the reputation of Iraqi women by basically painting them as prostitutes, showing Saudi men as
slaves,
slave owners, and buying sex, and they completely changed the narrative of the artwork. So that was the first chapter in this crazy history. Oh, is this being recorded? I don't know.
Do you want me to stop?
Yes, okay.
Too late, I think.
Yeah, it stays in this room.